HR 3365, which is the Prison Reform and Redemption Act, it affects lots of people, namely African Americans. The industrial prison complex is where many things take place. So you have agencies, bureaus, and of course you have the United States government at the forefront of it. And what happens with this is that you have some people who are wrongfully convicted and then people who are rightfully convicted, but they're serving maximum sentences for crimes that don't necessarily fit the time. Prison reform is something that is definitely needed. I feel like prison reform has a great and a wide effect on most Americans, and it affects all Americans. It affects all Americans in the aspect of taxation. We pay for the United States government, namely different agencies and subsidiary agencies within the United States government, to build prisons. While these prisons are being built, there's a huge lack of attention to so many other different areas, such as education, such as building schools, better books, and these mainly take away from people who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, such as African Americans, Hispanics. And when you look at the society that we live in right now and the policies that are being passed, they're not necessarily being passed at the benefit of African Americans. And the people who are mainly suffering for it are African American men, African American women, and African American adolescents. My scope is to look at fatherless African American adolescent males and what their success levels could be. And my primary objective within observing this policy of HR 3365 with the Prison Reform Act is to gauge how effective it is towards African Americans and or African American adolescent males who are fatherless, and to gauge as to if it helps or not. So the primary goal is to see the nuances in them and what changes could be made in them. If there were to be any kind of change within the industrial prison complex, I would say there needs to be a double down and overhaul on the industrial prison complex as a whole. So you have all these different entities that are a great representative of the 13th Amendment, which predates 1992. This constitutional act took place in 1789, and it reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." So it has a lot to do with slavery. And the profitability of different companies and bureaus and agencies and institutions within the industrial prison complex that makes up the industrial prison complex, actually. And so this is something that really needs to be re-examined. There needs to be a great deliberation over it by the House, within the Senate, and Congress. And so I just really feel like there needs to be a major change within prison reform. People are serving maximum sentences for things that they probably didn't otherwise commit. And then of course you have people who are rightfully convicted, yet still those convictions need to be re-examined in terms of how to rehabilitate individuals and or citizens who are serving time. The principal maximum sentence for a crime committed as opposed to a sentence for a first-time offense, let's just say they need to be redeveloped. For somebody who is a first-time offender, who is under the age of 18 and is a first-time offender, so those policies are looked at a state-to-state level, not at a federal level, because each and every state has its own constitution. Each and every state has its own constitution. I like to call them bi-constitutions. So you have these subsidiary constitutions that govern the lives of constituents within each state, and each state has ordinances that are governed by the senators. There are just so many moving parts, and it affects a lot of people. So I do feel like there needs to be a lot of change, re-examination, re-evaluation, and reassessing of the Prison Reform Act. Some of the things that can be considered are rehabilitation, true rehabilitation for inmates, the incarcerated, the convicted, however you want to call them. Those aren't necessarily interchangeable, because you have, well, an inmate and somebody who is incarcerated. But we can look at true rehabilitation. You know, are they going to counseling in there? What are they actually doing with the time, with their time while they're in there? And what does policy say about how they serve time?